Good evening, all you wonderful people from across North America who are making time for poetry on this chilly fall evening. My name is Vidya Natarajan. I write fiction and I teach writing at King's University College in London, Ontario, on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape and Chinonton peoples. It is my pleasure and honor this evening to welcome you all to this Words Fest event featuring eminent poets, scholars, and authors, Molly Peacock and Phillis Levin. Molly Peacock, embodiment of literary versatility, has 7 poetry collections to her credit, including The Analyst, The Second Blush, and Cornucopia. She's the author of a memoir titled Paradise Piece by Piece, and author or editor of books that, like her volunteer work as former president of the Poetry Society of America, reflect her lifelong interest in nourishing the art and craft of writing. How to read a poem and start a poetry circle, Poetry in Motion, 100 poems from the subways and buses, and several volumes in the annual The Best Canadian Poetry series. Her curiosity about the inner lives of women artists led her to write 2 biographies. One titled The Paper Garden, Mrs. Delaney begins her life's work at 72, and the other titled Flower Diary, Mary Hister Reed paints, travels, marries, and opens a door. Molly just told me that one of the paintings hanging behind her is by Mary Hister, and you'll see it when she turns on her camera. Among Molly's numerous honors are fellowships from the Canada Council of the Arts, National Endowment for the Arts, the Leon Levy Center for Biography, the Institute for Citizens and Scholars, and the New York State Council on the Arts. Molly divides her time between Canada and the US and teaches for the Unterberg Poetry Center. Phillis Levin's most recent poetry collection, Mr. Memory and Other Poems, was a finalist for the 2016 Los Angeles Times Book Prize. She has authored 4 other collections, Mayday, Mercury, The After Image, and Temples and Fields. Her scholarly interest in the sonnet led her to edit the Penguin Book of the Sonnet, and her honors include the Poetry Society of America's Norma Farber First Book Award, a Fulbright Scholar Award to Slovenia, the Amy Lowell Poetry Traveling Scholarship, and fellowships from the Ingram Merrill Foundation, the Guggenheim Foundation, the Bogliasco Foundation, and the National Endowment for the Arts. A professor of English and poet in residence at Hofstra University, Levin lives in New York City and in Connecticut. She has completed a 6th collection and is working on a memoir. What is unique about this evening's event is that we are about to overhear a conversation. Not any old conversation. This is the continuation of a conversation between 2 fast friends, a conversation about poetry and life that began during a writing seminar at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore in 1976 and has never ceased to flow since then. Like all good conversations, it connects the world of spirit with the everyday world. It brings together universals of love and grief on the one hand, and the minutiae of cross-border travel bookings on the other, prosodic choices and metaphor on the one hand, and ingredients in a dinner menu on the other. Molly Peacock took fragments of this long-standing conversation and arranged it into the celebration of literary and personal sisterhood that is our focus today, a genre-bending volume titled A Friend Sails In on a Poem. If you live in Canada, you can order the book through Palimpsest Books in Windsor, Ontario. And if you are in the US, you can order from the Corner Bookstore by email or telephone. They're very quaint, the Corner Bookstore. Words Fest's brilliant artistic director, Josh Lambier, will put the links in the chat for you. Please look out for them. A very warm welcome to you, our audience today. We are in webinar mode, but I would be very happy to collect your questions and read them out to Molly and Phyllis later in the session. For now, I invite Molly and Phyllis to turn on their microphones and take it away.
Thank you so much, Vidya. I heard you were a rock star of an introducer, and now I've got the proof. Thanks again. I also want to thank Josh Lambier for all of his behind the scenes help as we launch this webinar. And I particularly would like to thank Palimpsest Press, Jim Johnstone, the poetry editor, Jason Guriel, the editor of my particular book, and publisher Amy Parent Dunn. This is a genre-bending book, so I'm very, very pleased that Palimpsest took a chance on it. And of course, I want to thank Phyllis. Phyllis and I will be in a kind of conversation here this evening. I have excerpted various parts of this book and interwoven them with Phyllis's afterword. So you'll hear us, I hope, gently flow into one another in our conversation. Just to begin, this painting behind me, The Apple and the Pear, many people have asked me about that painting, and Thelma Rosner, London artist, is in our audience this evening, and she is the painter of this painting. So thank you, Thelma. And the other painting is the painting that Vidya referred to by Mary Heaster Reed. Chapter 1, A Friend Sails In on a Poem. It is lost on neither of us that inside friendship, the word ship sails beside the word friend. Phillis Levin and I, two poets, have played with words since learning to speak, and we delight in discovering that a living noun like friend is companion to a living suffix like ship, also a noun. We love our art. It has probably saved our lives. And through our poems, we have almost written our relationship with one another. For 46 years, we've each read almost every line the other has composed. Friend, both of us know very well, derives from Freund or love. How have we lasted almost a century? We are continents apart aesthetically. We are tiers apart in origins and class. You could not tell we were friends by our hair. One's is luxurious, pre-Raphaelite, long and still brunette. The other's is straight, thin, gray, blonde, and bobbed. Yet, an Anglo-Saxon riddle might describe both of our souls. Here's one, just to keep that sailing metaphor going. It's a translation of mine. It's a riddle, so the title is supposed to be the answer. It's called Ship's Figurehead. I was a girl, a gray queen, and a man, solo, all in a single hour. I flew with the birds, swam in the seas, dove under waves, died with the fishes, and stepped out on earth, alive, all in a single soul. There is a weird way in our conversations about poetry that we share a single soul. But let's not get too spiritual about it. Basically, what we share is food. We have been eating meals while talking poetry for nearly 5 decades. And as well as thoughts about how words animate feelings. A beet salad or a lemon poppy seed pancake enhances our arcane secret sort of refuge for the adults we are and for the children we were. We were white girls in the Anglo-Saxon binary sense, and simultaneously queens in the Anglo-Saxon teacher, woman, leader sense. And we were men in the think and act like a man sense of how we were educated. And we transformed ourselves. We flew through our lives like birds and crashed into windows too. We swam in the seas that transported us from desperate fear and dove under waves in attempt after attempt to make our lives. We came out onto earth as grown humans, alive in the poems we made and witnessed each other making. As you can tell, I have a bit of laryngitis. I've been doing a lot of talking about this book. In our decades together, other relationships have slipped and slid away. Sometimes one of us has lived alone without a primary love relationship, and sometimes the other one has. We both have reveled in the deep pleasure of profoundly satisfying marriages, though I live solo now since my husband died. At different times, Phyllis and I have moved into one another's somewhat abandoned spaces, like hermit crabs, darting to temporary homes. In the 1990s, Phyllis once spent weekends in the tiny East 71st Street, New York City studio apartment I no longer lived in, but used as a writing space. In 2008, I spent almost a year subletting her small one-bedroom Manhattan co-op on West 110th Street. When I moved in, I had felt perfectly free to charge in and rearrange all of Phyllis's furniture, including some files. How many other friends would tolerate your reshuffling of their rug, couch, chairs, and objects?
Afterword. There is no frigate like a boat. Emily Dickinson, poem 1263. That's the first line. A subject cannot constitute itself without a constituent object. Georg Lukács. Do you read me? My favorite childhood toy was a battery-operated globe that rotated on its axis. A metal mechanism revolved around it, blowing a steady stream of air on which a ping pong ball was suspended, the moon orbiting the Earth. That contraption informs the closing stanza of my poem, Something About Windows, reprinted in the first chapter of this book. But it was an image, a photograph of a park in Paris with a grove of chestnut trees and a vanishing point suggesting the infinite that provoked the poem into being, its opening lines arriving from a pre-linguistic elsewhere that often is poetry's source. My desire to touch the world, explore the globe, began long ago. So did my desire for friendship, for kinship with another soul. What great fortune to have a poet friend so alive to nuance, so open to sharing and renewal. A friend sails in on a poem. The horizon is beloved, familiar, in whatever weather. What appears emerges first in the distance, growing clearer and clearer as the form moves into sight. And we know this vessel will bring the thrill of surprise, that the cargo it carries will be rich and strange, that it will change before our eyes, and that the more our attention holds it, the more it will unfold.
Chapter 2, Makers of Our Lives. To be the makers, the shopes of our lives. Shope or poet doesn't mean singer in Anglo-Saxon, it means maker. That's what both Phyllis and I wanted when the seed of our friendship blew into Baltimore in the fall of 1976 and rooted at the writing seminars at Johns Hopkins University. At the opposite end of the seminar table sat a 22-year-old Phyllis in a plaid flannel shirt. At my end, I was newly divorced, 29 years old, and poured into a pair of straight-leg linen pants so tight they pulled at the seams a little bit, like the sonnets I was teaching myself to write. Those sonnets always seemed to go slightly past the 14th line. I wonder if that's the spirit of a sonnet tipping over my pile of a friend sails in on a poem book. We were fresh and excited and chosen from among many applicants. And I have to say, I'm just going to stop here and say that one of the people in this class is in this audience tonight. So hello, Ellen Woodbridge. And another person who was in the class before us, Dale Matthews, is also with us tonight. We sat at the table with two brilliant American poets who would become lifelong friends, Rachel Haddis and Thomas Slay, and another shining talent who became a novelist later, Lisa Zeidner. So capping the uniform of plaid shirt and jeans, a single strand of graduated pearls rested on Phyllis's collarbone. And I noticed that she's wearing them tonight. Now, Phyllis corrects me about those pearls. She acquired them much later, but she talked so often about a pearl necklace withheld by her family that my memory gives them to her just when she wanted them. An onyx ring with a tiny inlaid bird rested on her large, long hand. Phyllis seemed all intellect. She seemed to float through air as if she were made of air. I used to be ethereal, reads the first line of her poem, Definition. In her second book, The Afterimage, she'll read that poem in a moment. I instantly attached to her quick associations, how smart she was. In my natural state, I felt all body. When I wasn't eating and writing in my nightgown, I was having sex with my new boyfriend. My influences were the confessional poets. I longed to write what really happened, as Elizabeth Hardwick advised Robert Lowell. Though Phyllis was absorbed by the perceptions of her childhood, she was thoroughly uninterested in putting personal events in poetry. Her goal was always to create something universal and everlasting. I wanted to be true to history, to pieces of personal existence that would be a record of what happened to one woman in one time. If a fragment of one of my poems was the only thing left of me after a nuclear holocaust. I hoped that the reader who found it would think, so this is what it was like for her at that time, in that moment. If a fragment of one of Phyllis's poems was the only thing left, she hoped her reader would think, yes, this is what it's like now and forever, human and the same. I have often felt that Phyllis was the more real poet, the one whose poetry unfolded so elegantly. By comparison, my poems could seem energetically disheveled. Besides, I also wrote prose. In the book, I discussed two signature poems that didn't appear until our second volumes. One comes out of my anchoring in the body. The other comes out of Phyllis's anchoring in the mind. And now, usually, the way Phyllis and I have prepared this, I read my poem and then she reads hers. But I really need a break for my voice. So I'm going to ask her, she'll read her poem, and then I'll jump in with mine. Okay?
Of course. Definition. I used to be ethereal. It was my natural state to be detached, removed, indifferent, not to others, but to myself. Certain things fed me: the sky, clouds, books, and blue flowers. Anything red was taboo. Now I have softened in my outlook, and once I even wore red. People said it was especially becoming. They noticed me, and that's exactly what I was avoiding. If you could say who I was, I would die. If I was no one, no one could hurt me. Does this seem ridiculous to you? Of course you noticed me. Just as we all notice a child who covers her face from the glare of other eyes. All those years I was hiding from you, noticing so many things. I really saw nothing at all except who you were. But you weren't hiding from me. I thought I saw more because I didn't know you could see. Now I am lost without you. Tell me who I was.
Thanks so much, Phyllis. This is my slightly overgrown sonnet, The Lull. The possum lay on the tracks, fully dead. I'm the kind of person who stops to look. It was big and white with flies on its head, a thick, healthy, hairless tail, and strong hooked nails on its raccoon-like feet. It was a full-grown possum. It was sturdy and adult, only its head was smashed. In the lull that it took to look, you took the time to insult the corpse, the flies, the world, the fact that we were traipsing in our dress shoes down the railroad tracks. That's disgusting. You said that. Dreams, brains, fur, and guts. What we are. That's my bargain, the Pax Peacock with the world. Look hard. Life's soft. Life's cash is flesh. Flesh and flesh. Now, Phyllis often forgot to eat. She would write all day and never think about getting herself a meal. I've been preparing dinners for my family since the age of 12. Cooking for Phyllis, I discovered she was an enthusiast. She loved my salads, savoring every single ingredient. She effused over every dish as if it were her first encounter with eating itself. And I too am a taste enthusiast. Soon we ventured to little Baltimore restaurants to eat fried oysters, and then to Washington, D.C. to eat pad thai. I was the older one, the sensible adventurer, the one who knew how to manage in life. Phyllis was the sheltered one, yet who knew how to order a great bottle of wine. We discovered we were completely in sync as we looked at a menu. Our eyes would land on certain dishes we both instantly wanted to order. Before long, we realized that if we each ordered separate items for our dinner, we could share everything. Soon, we transferred this eating and talking to our lives in New York, sharing food combined with sharing poetry. We never critiqued one another's poems. Let me repeat that. We, capital N, never critiqued one another's poems. We showed them to one another with our coffee or tea in the Ukrainian National Home on First Avenue, where large-breasted, large-bellied, grandmotherly waitresses brought us chunky borscht, or at Tea and Sympathy on Greenwich Avenue, where a harried British hipster brought our cucumber sandwiches, or an ideal German restaurant on East 86th Street in Yorkville, where an energetic, efficiently thin woman in an apron with hair drawn back delivered our meatballs. "Oh, look what you did in this line," we might say to one another. "That's interesting," Phyllis would say, and then suddenly start quoting a philosopher she had read. Mushu pork, black bean sauce, steamed pea shoots, a fiend's herb omelet with chef, a frise salad, a baguette. How about a nice chopped liver sandwich on rye with a dill pickle? Phyllis and I have never dieted together. We always have full cream, full butter. We've never substituted low fat for anything. Certainly not low fat poetry. How can I explain to people that we don't critique each other? I asked Phyllis when she had read this part of what I've written. Say, it's like a studio visit, she said.
Well, given the number of cafes and restaurants Molly and I have dined in together and also on our own, I thought I would say very briefly that years ago I realized that those spaces are secular versions of sacred spaces, because people are surrounded by others whom they don't know, and yet they're sharing an experience, and then their own little cells or pods, either solo or the small group, where there is the intimacy of people knowing each other as friends or family. And I do believe one of the reasons people were so bereft during the height of the pandemic particularly, it was the shutdown of those spaces, and the inability to have these vicarious interactions with people we don't know, which really is those are the threads that tie us to each other, to our humanity to each other, and they're very memorable and they're part of every day. and things are opening up, as we know, though we are in a webinar, we are in a room together. But then again, people from all over the world, as well as other cities and towns, are able to be with us. When I read an earlier draft of A Friend Sails In on a Poem, I realized that in addition to portraying our literary friendship, Molly was making a self-portrait and a portrait of me as well as a person in time, apart from my work on the page, connecting the dots as best she could, deploying knowledge and impressions she gleaned over the decades we have known each other. As our lives transformed, as we became more and more ourselves, we always cherished an absolute belief in each other's talent, whatever else was brewing or looming personally, professionally. Sometimes I didn't recognize the person she was depicting or the milieu in which she thought I had been raised. Molly grasped the atmosphere, but sometimes the circumstances were different from what she imagined. Why does it matter for the record to be accurate? I could write my own memoir after all. Molly was filling in the blanks because she didn't have certain vital information, things undisclosed in conversation, though not withheld. She knew my poems well, had read almost everything I composed after turning 22, but much in my life remained unspoken or hidden, despite the troves of recollection we shared. In a few instances, the discrepancy between imagination and actuality was a gift. Molly's memory of our weekly poetry workshops at Johns Hopkins included a strand of pearls she bestowed on me retroactively, for they came into my possession several decades later, and a ring that for years was the only piece of jewelry I wore, encircled a finger of my hand before I purchased it. This lovely little mosaic, depicting the dove of the Holy Spirit, which I found in a shop in Florence a few years after Molly and I first met, became emblematic. As if Molly's misremembering when that ring became mine revealed her wish for me to have something I wanted, and her intuition that I'd have trouble allowing myself to possess what I desired, especially anything material, though she cautioned I was too easily smitten by beauty. The constant that runs through the time we know each other is our trust that each will give the other's work a depth of attention transcending appreciation, inhabit the other's playing field for a while, be non-judgmental in response, yet unafraid to offer a finely calibrated judgment. Molly's process of writing this book and my process of reading it led us to acknowledge the wealth of what remains unknown. In discovering other differences and distances, we built a new bridge between us.
I'm leaping ahead to chapter 8, which is called Casanova Idol. And before I start this, I'm going to give some shout outs because there are some amazing writers here in this audience this evening. I'm in awe. I'm just going to shout out people who are fabulous poets whose work I have followed over time, whose books are on my bookshelf. That is Christine Rhine is out here. And Shira Dentz is in our audience, Eileen Lipkin, Carolyn Hill, Ona Gritz, Dan Simpson, the poet Dan Simpson, Jody Weiner, Mark Elber, and there are other artists, and gee, I saw there was a distinguished sociologist, Ingrid Kanitas, from London, Ontario, who's in this audience this evening. And just there are many more people, more of you I know and whose names I recognize, but I just wanted to throw out a few of those names just here in the spirit of friendship. About poetry. To have a gift for something that is not understood or valued in the greater world, for something that is discounted, not an obvious part of an economy. Mystifying to businessmen, held suspect by politicians, viewed as a hobby, when in fact it beats at the core of life, forces the person with that gift always to engage in wily espionage to protect and nurture it. We found a place to help us do that. Cazenovia, New York, a wealthy town on the lands of the Haudenosaunee, full of the summer homes of former 19th and early 20th century robber barons, including Standard Oil financier Benjamin Brewster. Brewster's former mansion was located directly on Cazenovia Lake with a view of the water, and now rooms on 3 floors that comprised the Brewster Inn and a restaurant too. I proposed to Phyllis that we spend a week in Cazenovia together, and she was on to try our poets' retreat à deux. For 9 summers, we traveled to what the residents simply call Caz. Our husbands groused, but we were going. We were spending. Preparing our visit was like preparing to paint a room. We'd spend months as if with mental masking tape, drawing off the lines for future fresh paint. We'd both arrive armed with drafts, the bits and pieces accumulated through the year that we either didn't have time to develop or didn't know how to build up or couldn't concentrate on. By the time July arrived, our boxes, our portable printers, our reams of paper, our books, my purple pads, our little presents for one another were packed. It took a certain amount of money to fund our retreat in a world that denies the necessity of creativity, and a certain amount of self-worth to insist on it. The 9 summers rescued us from a devastating series of personal losses. In 2012, we began losing our mentors. Elfie Raymond, Phyllis's beloved philosophy professor at Sarah Lawrence, and Joan Stein, my psychotherapist and later friend, and also at a different time, Phyllis's psychotherapist. Yes, I'll let you read about that in the book. My dear older friend's husband died, and after that, she cut off from me. Then there were more and more frequent cancer recurrences for my husband. By the end of 9 years, after a roller coaster of a drug trial, Mike was dying. Phyllis's father was seriously ill, then passed away. Her mother became increasingly frail and died. Half a year later came the pandemic. It's said that the only subjects of lyric poetry are, thank you for waiting for this answer, love and death. Love and death are the reasons that we spent 9 culturally challenging, increasingly environmentally changing summers in Cazenovia. There we wrote. At odd moments, at breakfast in Cazenovia, together we made a shorthand of weather, food, and poem titles. We started them in 2011 in little notebooks, and we're going to read a pastiche of them now.
2012, Monday, July 9th. Seafood crepes, lamb chops, and a side of yummy spinach cooked with garlic. Right combination in terms of quantity and cost. Molly, Rosé. Phyllis, Washington State, Merlot. Discuss drafts of M's The Timothy and P's Journey Starting from a Window in a Dream.
July 10th, 2012. We're replicating the McDowell colony experience, Phyllis says, without the difficult people. We had a minor nervous breakdown about the placement of our table. Too much sun, they fluttered around us. What divas we were. But it mattered, as all details do. Then we went to our landing. That's the landing between the 2 floors where our rooms were, and exchanged poems and talked a bit about our therapist, Joan. Phyllis said, you spend time at an art colony looking for friends, but here it's ready-made.
July 12th, 2012. Breakfast, disappointing, because we ventured into French toast, too sweet and too seasoned with clove. Molly is working on a new poem, Paid Love. Phyllis worked on Boy with a Book Bag, as well as Demi-Tasse. Dinner was perfect at table 61. We have the system down. Fabulous shrimp cocktail, salmon cooked just right with no potatoes, salad, and a side of spinach.
Leaping ahead to 2013, July 10th, lunch, turkey salad, and fresh greens. Talked about Gail, my sister who passed away, and about Philip, Phyllis's brother. Phyllis reminded me that the word ecstasy means to stand outside yourself.
July 11th, 2013. I am in total contentment looking out at the bobbing swimmers, including dear Molly. Dinner table outside, not available, which was quite distressing. Luckily, a table opened up and we were in heaven. Beet salad with blue cheese, Pinot Noir.
Sunday, July 14th, 2013. Childhood private games and fantasies. Phyllis took Band-Aids and reattached leaves to the trees. Her earliest professional desire as a tiny child was to be a plant doctor. Both of us pretended to be spies. Scrambled eggs and toast. How do we feel our brains change throughout the whole body?
Tuesday, July 16th, 2013. So much is beyond words. Dinner last night on the dock outside my room with food we bought at the farmer's market and smuggled in to make for ourselves was sublime.
July 18th, our last breakfast. Phyllis picked the title of my new book, The Flower Diary of Mary Heaster Reed. Amazingly, she wrote 9 poems, some very small. Every year, we say it's our best year. Nostalgia for the present.
July 10th, 2019, Wednesday. We sighted a great blue heron. Truly a great one it was. Molly said, let's try this path, one we hadn't yet walked on during this visit to Cazenovia. Lo and behold, through the high grasses, lush willows, in a pool of water, there it was. And it stayed there a long time. And so did we, watching it.
We sit on the covered patio outside to eat and watch the sunset over the long dock into the lake and talk about our lives. Phyllis's delayed reaction to her father's death, my harrowing spring after Mike's hospitalization and reaction to his drug trial. July 16th, 2019, big leap ahead. Last night, Phyllis and I must have laughed for 3 hours at dinner, worked on my crown of sonnets, and tonight Phyllis plowed through 14 of them, laughing at all the funny parts, which got me laughing, and then we chuckled and howled through dinner. Everything's striking us funny, including an audio of frog sounds that suddenly went off inside Phyllis's bag. She had lots of poems and prose poems, including a frog haiku. Phyllis finishes our diary entry.
Last night, 15 July 2019, Molly and I had a splendid time at dinner looking over poems. Molly showed me a sonnet sequence filled with great wit and many streaks of pathos, quirky and sublime. We laughed and laughed, in many ways a refreshing evening, and we had a lovely breeze, gorgeous cirrus cloud, absolutely superb lobster roll, mine minus the roll, the best ever. What more could one ask for? Now it's a bit sad. There are only 2 full days left in this year's retreat since we leave on Thursday. We have each already written so much and given and received such excellent feedback in our work. The magic of this place, bird song galore, darning needles flitting, frog sounds interrupting day and night, the walk on the paths through the high grass and past the weeping willows brings us to an elsewhere that makes us feel truly home.
Making another leap forward. Chapter 12, Facts and Future. In the same way that doctors' offices still use that outmoded lump of a charcoal gray metal machine, the fax, so do Phyllis and I. It's like being committed to a typewriter or a flip phone or a vintage car. When the gravelly purr of my fax machine goes on, I know it can only be Phyllis. Faxing weds Phyllis and me to paper, and our eyes don't have to slide off screens. Phyllis doesn't have to re-injure her shoulder again and again. I don't have to invite an ocular migraine from screen overuse. And there is the luxury of the pen in the hand, the typeface, and the friends set up on the page, with our handwriting and Phyllis's elaborate lettering system of alternatives to line breaks and vocabulary. The faxes prompt a phone conversation, and then we sit down on a subsequent morning where we have breakfast on the phone as if we had stayed overnight at one or the other's house, and we talk in the same way that we would talk at a table. Now, carrying on my fish metaphor, which has wound its way through this book, Here's a poem I wrote that extends this process as it pertains to both of us. In it, Phyllis cooks a fish and we both eat it. Now I realize it's another version of that that line in the Anglo-Saxon riddle, died with the fishes. It's called Old Friends. One waiting, one attending. Patience. Now a gift will be delivered. Her food from her hands. Her turn tonight. All the good little dishes assembled, and friendship hence ever so slightly adjusted in level. No one grows evenly. One surges, one lags. But here comes a resting point. All focus on a platter. Two soul almost wag their tails, so happy are they served. Lovely. Think so? Thank you. Our pleasure crosses and recrosses, making cursive loops as if written on paper, a measure of lines made by our lives as they swerve by, making letters. My meal, her meal, a missive. Though we rarely cook together, we talk about cooking and sometimes talk on the phone while we are cooking. Ukrainian borscht is one of the things each of us has made with great effort. Whenever Phyllis and I see a beet salad on the menu, we know that's one of the things we're going to get. The red beets go straight to our bloodstreams, and Phyllis has a juicy poem about them.
Beets. Take them in your hands and peel them until shades of red darken your skin, get under your nails, as at last you succumb to understanding that making borscht leads to nothing less than accepting the stain of the earth, its signs in freckles spotting your face, marking the cookbook's margin. Rubies will soon appear, wet jewels that live underground until someone digging past ruddy leaves lifts them into the sun before they are sent to where you buy them, bound and sleeping in dust. Grating is an exercise in boredom. So you listen to Handel or look out a window until you scrape a knuckle and finally see. To finish a task is to stay with it completely, knowing it will end if you take your time. After this, meat seems superfluous, almost revolting, but the bone must go in and cook until it falls into shreds. The struggle to be free. From what exactly? And for what? To what end? Perhaps to no end in sight. It has been different for each of us in different moments of our lives. For the poem to be its fullest expression of itself, we each have been witness to this struggle in the other, as individuals and as poets. Often, the work could achieve what the person could not. When I look back on the many poems I composed before the age of 18, I marvel at how they knew what would take a few more decades to learn. Likewise, it's possible that Molly intuited aspects of my future life before I began to live those moments. Being born 7 years apart was significant, but eventually that difference faded. I had been wise for as long as I remained detached from my emotion. As time progressed, it seemed I knew less and less until something shifted, transformed. Molly was there to welcome me again, to recognize and accept.
Thank you, Phyllis. And I realize, of course, that my coughing shoots the screen onto me for a minute, and I apologize.
No, it's a relief. Are you kidding?
Like,
I don't like attention, remember? I would have just turned off the video if it were up to me.
So, we're going to read our last two tiny statements here. But before that, I just want to say I keep noticing all these marvelous writers in this audience, and I'm just shouting out names here of Ashley Mabbitt, Claudia Gary, Carolyn LeBlanc, Joyce Wilson, Dana Delabovi, Jane Suskin is here, Sophia Fascianos is here, artist Melinda Tepler is here, poet Lou Capps is here, poet Nina Zucker, poet Sandra Morris, poet Leslie Prosterman, my 7th grade teacher Bernice Baumler is here, which, I mean, what can I say? That's best of all. And you know, many friends and colleagues' names I see flying by. Oh, Alicia Payne, the Canadian actor who also reads Flower Diary on the audiobook so beautifully. I just saw her name fly by. Thanks.
And my brother is here, my brother Philip Levin, who I knew in a way, but well, I saw him the first day my parents brought him back, and he's known me since, well, I met him, and I was 3 when I met him, and he met me. So thank you, Philip, for tuning in.
This is fun. It's one of the great advantages of Zoom is making this kind of a party, this kind of gathering. I see that Godfrey Jordan, the Irish Canadian documentarian, is here, and the screenwriter Richard Watson is here. Lots of people we know and are so attached to. So just 2 little paragraphs. As I write this, Phyllis and I have seen each other once at El Tesi restaurant in New York after almost 2 pandemic years. It was the week our mentor, Richard Howard, died at 92. I am 75 and Phyllis 68. We settled in the orange leather chairs and ordered a feast. Vitello tonato, salmon with fennel and dill, sauteed artichokes with zucchini and shrimp, 2 glasses of Falangina. We mused about our fathers. They both had workshops. We both watched them build things. Precision was involved. A mechanical creature, like an electric saw, came to life. We thought about how precision is so important to poetry. Phyllis was wearing a gray and blue print top I have seen her wear for years with her signature black skirt. I was wearing my signature black pencil pants with a blue jacket and periwinkle and yellow scarf. We returned to our theme of mirrors. rhyme really is a mirror where you see sound as well as hear it. I mused as Phyllis remembered putting two mirrors together as a child. It's where interiority and exteriority meet, she said. Then we started on the artichokes.
Via language, we intimate, consciously or subliminally, the essence of who we are. Yet much of who we are to others and to ourselves may seem incomprehensible, remain a mystery. Do you read me? That's what we ask sometimes through static, hoping our words have traveled across a distance and arrived. Something essential has been said. Is the quality of the transmission sufficiently clear? With those same words, we ask someone to affirm that the essence of what we mean, what we intend, is understood. What more could one ask of a reader, a writer, a friend?
Thank you, Phyllis.
Thank you, Molly.
Not every friend would let you write a book about their relationship with you. And I'm always moved. Now, this is not scripted, so I'm bumbling about here. Yeah, but so I'm just saying that I'm grateful and hoping that Vidya is going to rescue me from bumbling here.
Molly and Phyllis. Molly, gratitude, I think, is one of the notes that almost all your listeners have struck where they've commented today. So thank you for that riveting exchange. I feel fortunate to have heard you engaging with each other as readers, writers, and friends. And the comments tell me that the audience has felt the same delight as I have in your dazzling craft and your wordplay, your energetic dishevelment of traditional poetic forms, and above all, your emotive memories of this long friendship. A commenter has asked where they can find such a friend. So I'm not quite seeing any questions in the Q&A at the moment. Just give me a minute to check. Yes, there is one. I'm going to read out this question to you. Hi, I know you mentioned a lot of well-known poets are here, but I'm curious to know if you have any advice for newer poets. Do you recommend submitting to journals, self-publishing your own work? How do you become a poet with a wide reach?
Well, how you become a poet with a wide reach, I think, is that you start small. You know, that you start with whatever it is that's pressing inside you to write, and you keep doing it. And in terms of then sending things out, of course, then you should buy the best Canadian poetry volume every year and look in the back and see all those magazines and websites so that it gives you an opportunity of knowing where to send out. And you can post your work, etc. And then you increase your reach. But sometimes an intimacy with an audience, a few people who remain your readers, is as rewarding for those individuals and for you as something that is more widespread. I guess I would say that there's a lot to be said for the intimacy between the poet and the reader. So
Yes.
just a thought for you.
And I'll add that imagining someone else who understands, whether the person is real or imagined, almost doesn't matter. The problem is thinking of an audience that's larger, whereas if one just imagines an other, the capital O, and assumes that other will understand, one doesn't stumble. People, I think, we stumble most when we try to explain. In poetry, that's deadly. It sinks the ship very quickly. One could always later enhance or fill, but to assume that you are understood opens so many doors within oneself. There's this direct access one has when one believes one will be comprehended. And it sometimes means tricking oneself into believing it.
And that, I mean, Phyllis makes a wonderful point about imagining that one other person. And I had a teacher who said to me once, write to the next head on the pillow. And it's something that I recall to myself and still cherish, and something I offer and pass on to you.
I'm going to ask a question related to your point from Claudia Gary. It's been a great privilege and very helpful to receive critiques on my poems from each of you at different times. And I greatly enjoy poems both of you have written. So I'm puzzled by Molly's statement that you do not critique each other. Is this just an issue of semantics?
Well, I meant critique in that way of that sort of pointed, distanced, interfering way of critiquing. It's not that we don't have things to say about one another's work. We do. I mean, Phyllis has a spectacular vocabulary, and she's always coming up with language that I hadn't thought of. Like, oh, what have you said? Blah, blah, blah. And I go, oh my gosh, of course. And Phyllis, who essentially has a lyric sensibility, she can correct me if I'm misperceiving this, sometimes tackles narrative subjects. And I have a narrative sense. So I'm often able to say to her, well, look, what if you resequence this? Or what if you tried this other thing? But it's the what if you, it's that feeling that you're sharing something. And I think that a critique does not come out of shared experience or shared that sense of mutuality that we, I was going to say strive for, but we don't really strive for.
There's the trust. There's the trust and the respect hold everything. And so, of course, we're both cautious sometimes. There are moments, and as Molly knows, I can move all over the board in many directions and yet have trouble getting from point A to B. So there's certain kinds of logical progressions. If it's not musically working for me, I'm at a loss. It has to work on a non-linear, it's synchronic for me, you know, the sounds or suggesting other sounds. And I think that's also true for Molly, and it's not that I never write prose, it's just it's a different sensibility. And also I think the more we write, the more we experiment with sensibilities that overlap with each other. So Molly writes amazing lyric poems. It's not that you don't write lyric poems.
No, I do write lyric poems.
And, but for me, there must be a lot of space between the stars or the constellation to create joy. And so, and you know, to me, one of the definitions of lyric is that it's like looking up at the heavens and seeing the constellation for the first time. The joy is in seeing it for the first time, but it's always not the first time. But because there's so much space and because there's a randomness, one is involved in the making of it. And that's that weird thing that happens between the reader and the poem, which is the reader makes the poem happen, but the poem has to be there enough. There have to be enough words and enough music for the reader to make it happen. It's not a Rorschach test.
Yeah, yeah,
Or we
yeah.
strayed. We strayed, didn't we, from the question?
Well, I mean, Claude,
There are quite a few questions left.
Oops, so, go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, Molly. Oh, I didn't mean to cut in there. I just was going to say there are quite a few questions more if
Oh,
you
okay,
have the energy to take them.
sure.
And there are several questions on the relationship and the friendship and the process of writing, but I'm going to ask a lighthearted question so you get a little mental break here. This is from Godfrey Jordan, and he says, this is for Phyllis, about that 2012 breakfast with the French toast. Was that too sweet or too sweet?
Well, I don't like most sweets. So to me, to have sweets in the morning is almost ruins the day. So for me, it was too sweet. But I remember there was too much clove. And that was probably in a different place. It wasn't our usual place, Molly, right?
Yeah.
That's a whole other story, because there was this wonderful old-fashioned diner that we used to go to for breakfast, and it was closed one day a week, and then at a certain point it completely closed down, and we had to find another place. And I mean, it sounds as if we're quite spoiled, but as Molly said, everything matters. And partly because we were working so many hours every day in solitude, there was this precious time we would be together in early morning for breakfast and then again in the evening. And so the sense of, oh my God, will we not be able to be outside, or will we be too much in the sun and therefore we can't even see the page? Those things became so important because time was so precious, because we only had 10 days. And so every single day mattered so much, and the little things gave us so much joy, as much as perhaps not having the table we wanted also distressed us.
Speaking of food, I'm going to make a bit of a salad out of 2 or 3 questions that have been asked that seem to me to be related here. One of the questions is, are there other records of friendship like yours that you find inspiring? And related to that, does jealousy or envy ever sneak into your relationship?
I always look for records of artistic relationships, and the closest I can come is the relationship between Maxine Cumin and Anne Sexton, where they would both call each other on the phone and leave the phone line open as they in their kitchens as they were going about their domestic chores and reading one another the poems that they were writing. That didn't go on for very long, though. I mean, if that went on for a decade, I don't even think it went on for a decade. I haven't found too many records of long relationships and how they've unfolded. There are, of course, records of rivalry. And when 2 women artists or writers or dancers or what have you have been talked about in their relationship, often rivalry has been focused on. So that leads me into the jealousy envy question. Phyllis very rightly says that we began with a 7-year age difference. That's a big difference between a 22-year-old and a 29-year-old. Now, obviously, it's not so different. That doesn't feel different now, but we were at different stages in our career and in our careers. And even though we're both extremely ambitious and never made any bones about that, what we were about were our first drafts, our evolving work. We didn't, and we don't, it's not that we don't occasionally talk about publishers and publishing and that sort of thing, but it's not where our relationship is. And I am pretty internally sort of fierce about that. I want the friendship. I don't want the rivalry. There's Sina Jeter Naslund. There are a few people who know her in this audience. Often says competition. The competition is in the library. And I feel very strongly about that. I subscribe to that theory.
And there are, of course, there's Wordsworth and Coleridge, there's Melville and Hawthorne. There are a number of, if you think also of Dorothy Wordsworth and her brother, there are often, though, at a certain point, there were terrible tensions and isolations and separations. I don't think there's any explanation for why it's lasted, although I think the commitment to the friendship matters so much. And as I mentioned once to Molly, I don't have a sister, I have a brother, and so I don't have the Velcro strip for sister. I don't have sister issues. I couldn't because I didn't grow up with a sister. I know a number of women in the arts, different genres of the arts, who have tensions and rivalries with their sisters, sometimes brutal. They love their sisters, but there's very severe competition. But that just wasn't there. There's no foundation for that in my psyche. So there was kind of a blank slate, and I think that helped. And as Molly and I realized in the process of Molly writing the book and me reading it, certain things would happen in each other's careers, but because of the age difference, so you were so old by the time you published your first book, and they were like, well, actually, you were the same age when you published your, it's just that because this is 7 years. It happened 7 years later for me because I was 7 years younger. So it's very funny. It makes me think of that cartoon of the father and the son in the snow, and the little boy is almost buried alive, and the snow is up to his eyes, and the father is quite tall and up ahead of him, and it's up to sort of his knees. And the father says, "This is nothing. When I was your age, it was up to my eyes." So I think we it took us a while to get that perspective. How come you're not catching up? I don't think that was ever said overtly, but there was a sense of, I think you knew that this needed to happen for me. And it took a while. I published a lot in magazines before my first book was accepted. But my first book kept not being accepted. It kept being almost accepted. And that must have been hard for you to watch. But you went through that too. Oh, yeah. But I didn't watch it the same way.
And I think also, interestingly, in writing this book, we discovered that even though there's that age difference, the professional things happen to us at the same stage in our lives. Yeah. So, it's a funny thing, but I think it's also sort of a decision to give the other person a lot of space. There's a lot of air in this relationship, and also, I know, a lot of curiosity. Like the fax machine goes off, and I read the poem from Phillis. And I think, oh, that's where she is. That's what she's doing. And it interests me. And it never fails to interest me. It always interests me. Because I'm following the course of somebody's life and in art. And it's rich. It's a rich experience. And happily, we've both had a lot of success independently. And a lot of luck in and our aesthetics are quite different. So they're in different circles. But so that's helped because we're ambitious and we've succeeded independently.
And we're so different from each other in terms of our just the people we are and the kind of work we do, that we are infinitely interested in each other because we could never predict it, and I could never write the poems you write. And yet when I read your poems, I'm like, oh, there's this feeling of inevitability, and yet always a feeling of surprise and delight and pure admiration. And but there's this, it's the otherness. I think the distance allows us to be connected.
Yeah, I
so
think you're right.
from each other as people, and also stylistically and temperamentally, and yet we'll often land on the same poem by another poet whom we adore.
Yes, that's true. We have taste in common.
Like, you'll say, I think read this book, and it'll blow me away. You'll know, you'll be, of all the thousands or hundreds of thousands of books, you'll know which one to suggest. Or I'll say, I think you might want to go to this exhibition. And you're like, oh my God.
I think between the things that you both said just now, you've pretty much answered Margaret Lonsdale's question. I'm going to ask it anyway, in case you see something there that you haven't actually addressed. She says, what is your response emotionally to go back now and read or review the fragility of relationship details you've expressed in words through this work? What was the impetus to put it all down? And I think your point about curiosity and interest in each other partially answered that, for sure.
The impetus to write it down, that's an interesting question, Margaret Lonsdale. For me, writing is thinking. If I write it down, then I can sort of think it through. And I know we have an unusual relationship, and it fascinates me. Now, there's I do something else other than write poetry. I write biographies, and I've written a memoir, and the shapes of people's lives and relationships fascinate me. And I think, well, both of those play into this book, but a sense of wanting to preserve it. I feel like it's marvelous and ephemeral, and I wanted to. I think there was just that urge that writing it down meant to preserve it, and also to look at it and this sounds sort of strange, but to touch it in some way. And also, I should say this, the book came about because I was supposed to collect my essays about poetry. And I started doing it because I promised Palimpsest Press that I would do it. And I put them off year after year. And finally, I absolutely had to honor this commitment. And I started putting the essays together. And I thought, I am so goddamn bored. Who the hell wants to read my essays about poetry? I can't even stand rereading these essays. And then I thought, well, what do you really want to write about? And I thought, I want to write about the vitality of this exchange. So.
Thank you. That was a fabulous answer. I just wanted to read out Philip Levin's little comment here. Phyllis, I hope you caught this. I just didn't want it to get missed.
I didn't. I'm not looking at the chat, so it's new.
Philip says, Molly and Phyllis, it was a wonderful evening listening to you discuss your friendship and adventures together in life over many decades. So I just wanted you to know that Philip put something in chat.
Thank you, my dear.
I have a question from Yoda. who I hope, the question I hope will be answered by Josh in the chat. Yoda says, if we are local, can we pick up the book in person at the Western bookstore? So Josh, I'll leave that one to you. And finally, we have something that the author says is not a poetry question at all. This is from Susan Hughes. She says, I'm admiring the paintings on the walls behind you both, similar and yet very different. Could you tell us the names of the artists in each case, please?
This is by Julian Hatton III, whose work I discovered by chance reading an article about, I saw a few images, including a photograph of this painting, and told my husband I just had to go to this exhibition. It was the very last day it was going to be up in New York, and happened to have been my parents' wedding anniversary date. So there was something about that. I think that was charged, but it was just by chance the same date as the last day of the exhibition. And my husband didn't realize how strongly that painting had reverberated with me. And he walked into the gallery and scanned the whole several rooms and went right up to that painting, and he had fallen for it too. And so I think it's probably the only time I've ever really bought a painting, but it just sees us, and it seems to always have depth, have another world to it. And it's playful, and it's more colorful than what I would expect of myself to want, but it's joyous. And of course I love Bonnard and Matisse. I could see the influence is so obvious. But this is a contemporary artist who's very actively continuing to paint. Julian Hatton III, Hatton.
Yes, it's a gorgeous painting. At the beginning of this evening, I identified these two paintings, but I'm happy to do it again. And Josh, would you put the links to buy the books in the chat again? I'm just doing my homework here. This painting of the apple and pear is by a London, Ontario artist, Thelma Rosner. And she's fabulous. And if you don't know her work, please go to her website, because you can see a lot of amazing images there. Thelma Rosner, Rosner. And this painting is a very late 19th century painting by Mary Heaster Reed. And I wrote her biography, Flower Diary. Mary Heaster Reed paints, travels, marries, and opens a door.
And some of our times at Cazenovia, I was reading chapters of that biography, and which kept transmogrifying. I kept thinking, it can't get any better. And then Molly would have another reshaping. It's not just, we're not only talking about revising chapters, we're talking about re-envisioning the whole shape. And one of the odd things about this particular artist is she happens to be from the same town my father's father was born in, and where my father was born and raised, Reading, Pennsylvania. So that's yet another weird
yes, correspondence.
The book you wrote, Molly, part of what it does, it has to do with the relationship between absence and presence, are not being able to go to Cazenovia. The material reality of the book, it's a reification of the sharing experience. We couldn't be in that space because of the pandemic. Mike was getting ill.
Yeah.
But also then the pandemic, the borders closed. You couldn't come to.
No, I couldn't.
Cross the border.
No.
And so the impossibility of being in a shared space turned into a shared space.
Yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. What a wonderful thing. Yeah. So in a way, yes, probably this book wouldn't have happened if we were actually seeing one another. So true enough. Just wanted to say, I wanted to thank Dawn Pergakis for her comments in the chat, and to ask Josh if he would please save the chat for us, because it's really hard to present and read the chat at the same time. So if I know you can, I have a feeling you could preserve that, and I would appreciate it. Thanks.
Josh says he will do that for you, Molly. And we have this other comment, which I do want to read out, being the night that it is in the US. The reading so moving, as were your answers to the questions. I felt so much love on a really difficult night in America, and I thank you for that.
Well, thanks. Yes, we're a little bit of what can I say? A prelude, a relieving prelude to the statistics that will come rolling in soon.
Yeah. So I want to say a huge thanks to Molly and Phyllis and to Josh for making this possible, and to this absolutely amazing, brilliant, and talented audience that has, you know, kind of closed this circle this evening. And I've had a wonderful time. I've enjoyed myself so much, and I'm sure everybody else has. And Molly and Phyllis, do you want to sort of say any closing points and make any closing points? I didn't mean to drop that one on you. You can just say
I'm just going to end on gratitude again. Just to so many people registered for this event and actually showed up. We were talking about the statistics about who registers and who actually shows up. We beat those. We beat the
voted for poetry
usual proportion. So I just want to thank everyone.
Thank you for being here, really. Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely think we struck a blow for poetry.
Yes,
thanks to Molly and Phyllis.
And thank you, Vidya, who is a marvelous novelist, by the way, and poets love being interviewed and introduced by novelists. So that this was a special treat being with you this evening.
It was the same for me. Wish everybody a wonderful night. Thank you for being here.